Afternoon, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be before this beautiful family. So I'll jump right into it. Thank you, Dr. Felix, for the introduction. So why are we having this presentation? Well, it's to increase understanding of emotions generally, and specifically anger, and basically to teach everyone how to manage anger. So I'm hoping you'll take away today specific individual tailored skills of how you can control your own anger. Okay, so I'd like to acknowledge the Plato's Academy Center. It's a center for psychology and philosophy that is at Athens in Greece, and especially Dr. Donald Robertson, and that's because they had a webinar that I was privileged to attend, a live webinar earlier this year in March. So a bit of what I'm going to talk about is gleaned from that. So I just want to acknowledge that. So many therapists, different types of therapists, cognitive behavioral therapists, schema-focused therapists, acceptance, commitment-based therapists. So what we're learning is a myriad of diverse techniques to handle anger from all these different psychotherapeutic modalities. So I'll walk you through using this outline. And I'll first of all introduce emotions and define anger. We'll differentiate between anger and aggression. Why we get angry, is anger useful? So a lot of us mistake anger with aggression. So anger is not aggression. You can be angry and not be aggressive about it. You can be assertive. And anger actually does have its benefits. So when we say we want to manage anger, we're not trying to get rid of it, because it does have its benefits, which you shall soon see. So what happens when we're angry? Are there consequences of anger? And how do we handle anger most importantly? And then we'll conclude. So I brought up this picture. These are my sons. The older one is 16 and the second one is 12. So I wanted to paint a personal scenario of me getting angry so that we'll refer to it when I talk about how to handle it. So it won't be some castle built in the sky kind of thing. I'll use my personal experience to explain the techniques that I'm going to teach so that it would really sink in, that we're not talking prior theory here. We're talking about things you can really use to help you. So let me paint this real life scenario. So these boys, the first one, the bigger one is writing WAEC, and the second one is writing BECE. He's going to SS1. So bearing this in mind, I live in an estate, so there's a friend of ours whose child also attends their secondary school. So we had this agreement that we would carpool. So she would help take the kids to school, and then I would help bring them back. So with the background of having that these kids have these exams, and her daughter is in my son's class, the older son. So, but unfortunately, one day she was meant to come and pick them up as planned, and she didn't show up. And not only did she not show up, I wasn't given prior knowledge. So I had to hurriedly jump in the car and take off to school. So understandably, I was angry, because I never default when it comes to her kids. And I felt like this is a dialogue we've had. This is something we've agreed on. Why would you not show up on an important day, the beginning of WAEC and BECE, and you wouldn't give me foreknowledge? So I felt disrespected and I was angry. So bear this scenario in mind when we talk about all the things we're going to talk about. I will refer to this so that you have a sense of how I felt when this happened. I was angry. So, introduction, what are emotions? So emotions are conscious psychological reactions that we experience as strong feelings. So the important thing to note about emotions is that not only are they directed towards someone or something, it could be ourselves, but they're typically accompanied by physiological, that means bodily changes and behavioral changes. So every emotion, anger, not exempted, urges us to do something. So we all know anger to urge us to be aggressive, and changes is associated with changes in our body. So anger typically increased heart rate. You notice your heart beating faster. You notice your breathing is faster. You might notice, that you're clenching your fist. You might notice that your muscles are getting tighter. So bear this in mind as we walk through how to handle this, because some of these things I'm explaining in definition is a cue, a clue to know that you're angry on time and be able to douse that fire. So about emotions. So emotions, like the young lady here wearing the dark shades, they're like dark shades. We see what the emotions paint for us to see, not necessarily the reality. So where did they come from? They come from a part in our brain. There are structures in our brain called the limbic system, especially one called the amygdala. So it's important to understand this because when we're angry, this structure in our brain is hyper firing. And when it does that, the control center, our prefrontal cortex, as the front part of our brain, that is meant to douse the emotion and tell us, calm down, this is not in your own best interest, is inhibited. That means it is silent, while the active and emotional center in our brain, the amygdala, is hyperactive. Now, this is the reason why when you're angry and you act, someone will ask you, what in the world were you thinking? The answer is you were not thinking. Your emotions were pushing you and you acted based on how you felt. So emotions are like dark glasses. We're not thinking. They shape what we see, they shape our perspective, and they urge us to do, act in certain ways that may not even be in our own best interest ultimately. So whether the thoughts we have that lead to our emotions are factual or not, the emotions come about. And no matter whether they are realistic or not, these thoughts, they drive our emotions and make us feel the way we feel. And the emotions can give rise to thoughts, and thoughts can give rise to emotions. So let me summarize that again. Our emotions come from the things that go through our mind. So in that example I gave you with my neighbor and my kids, the thoughts that went through my mind was, how disrespectful. I would never do this to you. They're children. They're writing exams. How would you feel if I did the same to you? So all these thoughts gave rise to my anger. So I mentioned about some anatomical structures. I just wanted you to have a picture in your mind when I mentioned the amygdala. So if you can find the amygdala here, a very small structure in the middle of the brain, if you can find it. And this is the part of our brain that is responsible for fear and anger. And you can see the prefrontal cortex in the front, the pink part of the cerebral hemisphere. Now, this is the part that is responsible for rational judgment and logic. And I was explaining that when we're angry or experience any intense emotion, the amygdala, the hippocampus, these areas are active and the prefrontal cortex is silent. And that is why emotions seem to drive our behavior without any input from our logic, our judgment, and our decision-making areas. So anger is this powerful emotion that arises when we feel like we're threatened, when we feel something unjust has happened and we feel frustrated. So in the example I gave you with my neighbor and my kids, I felt this is unfair, this is not right. And that was why I was angry. So it is characterized by physiological changes, that is bodily changes like increased energy. Anger is known for the energy it brings. You want to do something with the energy. Typically, you might want to hit somebody or might want to be verbally aggressive. So the energy that is built up in us is something that we should take note of. And also, like I mentioned earlier, increased heart rate, respiratory rate, other physiological symptoms like tense muscles. So I just want to derail a little bit. So because anger produces these physiological or bodily changes, then apart from, aggression and behavior and all that, it would not be far-fetched for you to understand that when your muscles are tensed because you are angry. So imagine a subtle, chronic, ongoing anger, maybe frustration at the workplace. You can understand why it would build and result into muscle tension-type headaches, muscle worsening of lower back pain, because muscles are tense. And if the emotion is chronic and ongoing, you have this low-grade annoyance and tension that builds up. And you can imagine how this would affect your sleep. So typically people who are experiencing any kind of heightened emotion, sleep is disturbed, muscle tension, and things like that. So this is just a summary of what I was saying. So it's a neurophysiological response, meaning that comes from our brain and affects our bodies, and it's automatic. It's something that's, kicks in when we feel threatened, frustrated, like something unjust has happened. So anger could be a primary or a secondary emotion. So an emotion is said to be primary when it is directly responsible, the direct response of a situation. Like this one I told you, she didn't pick the kids, they're going to be late for their exams, I was angry. Or it could be a secondary emotion as well. Secondary emotion is emotions that arise as a result of emotions. So let's assume my husband forgot my birthday. So in primary emotion might be hurt, or feeling of, he doesn't love me. Then anger would be a secondary emotion. How dare you forget my birthday? After all, last year, I went out of my way. So you see that anger could be primary, like in the example I gave you, or it could arise to shield the more vulnerable emotions like hurt, vulnerability, softer emotions. And I want to point out that we humans typically would rather show anger because it's more socially acceptable to be angry than to be hurt, vulnerable. Those are weak. No one wants to be seen as weak and vulnerable. So we show up as angry when underneath it all, there might be fear, there might be hurt, there might be vulnerability. So anger is neither good nor bad. So a lot of times we see anger, it's bad. Not so. Anger, as like every other emotion, is neutral. It depends on what you do with it. So it could be bad if you follow the urge of the emotion and allow it to translate into aggression, where you hit people. Like in the example I gave you, imagine if I went over to her house and gave her a piece of my mind and walked out, or gave her a dirty slap or something. So that would be aggression. But I don't have to do that. I could channel the energy of anger into something else. I could be more assertive, which is actually what I did. So I called her, she didn't pick. I left a voice note and said, I understand you might be busy, but these children are writing exams. If you couldn't meet up with the agreement, I would have appreciated a text message or a call. So that was in line with my values and who I wanted to be seen as and how I wanted to show up in the world. So that is the difference between reacting, following the emotion, versus responding, acting according to what matters and how you want to be seen. So as one of my trainers, Dr. Norman Cottrell, a US psychologist, would say, anger is energy to do the right thing in the service of your values. So it doesn't necessarily have to equal aggression. We know that anger increases energy. We know the physiological bodily changes it brings, but we don't have to let ourselves be carried along by the amygdala and all its activities, hyperactivities. We can choose to respond the way we want to according to our values, and that's what this presentation is all about. So examples of anger, we know 9/11, the Islamic terrorist attack on US. We know what's going on currently in our country between Senators Akpabio and Natasha. We've seen anger right here in the DMC. So I said that anger is not the same as aggression. So aggression is the behavioral aspect of anger. And it's when you let the anger lead you to respond physically or verbally. So you are aggressive verbally, you are insolent, you insult, you berate, you talk condescendingly to people. Or you can be physically aggressive, where you take to your fists and sort it out physically. So that's about aggression. Then you can also have a type of aggression that is not expressive. So it means you're not saying anything, you're not acting in any aggressive way or violent way, but you are inexpressive and the anger is simmering inside. So that is called hostility. So when you are angry and you are reacting, but in an inexpressive way, meaning like you're holding a grudge against that person. So this is important because talking about anger leads to hostility if you don't handle it correctly. And hostility, we know, because we're medical people, that research has shown increases cardiovascular risk. So hostility is actually a cardiovascular risk factor, increasing the risk of hypertension and heart disease and all sorts of things because of the pathway through cortisol, which is a hormone that is produced when these emotions are active. So this is one incentive why we should learn to handle our anger, because it harms us. The ones who feel the anger are the ones that are harmed by it. So, but we also have reactive relational aggression. This is where, rather than being aggressive, reactive expressive, like you are aggressive verbally and physically, or inexpressive, where you're reactive inexpressive, you are reactive relational. So you don't address the issue that is annoying you. You go on and spread malicious rumors and destroy the image of the person you're angry at. So these are the different types of aggression that we have. So why we get angry? We get angry because we perceive that we've been threatened or harmed in some way. So in the example I painted, I felt like an injustice had occurred. It was unfair. So that is why I got angry. Sometimes we also feel like our self-esteem has been threatened. I felt disrespected when that happened. I felt like, why would you treat me this way? I wouldn't do that to you. So these are the reasons why we get angry. We feel like someone has transgressed our rules that we believe in. Like, for instance, you should be fair, you should be respectful, which were some of my rules. And I felt like my self-esteem was threatened because I felt disrespected. Another reason why we get angry next is if someone is obstructing or blocking or frustrating us. So someone is not allowing us to, go in the line that we want to go. So yes, it was frustrating and annoying. So I did feel like her actions were obstructing me from taking my children to school to write their exams. And of all days, the day that they had this exam. So it was really upsetting to me. Another reason we get angry is when we perceive that we're being treated unfairly, I've said that, and when people's behavior falls short of our expectations. So in this explanation lies the intervention. That's why I'm really taking my time to explain it, because if you understand why you get angry, then you can also understand what to do about your anger. The last point I mentioned where I said, other people's behavior falls short of our expectations. So there's this tendency to have expectations for ourselves and other people. Other people should be fair. Other people should respect me. But guess what? We have zero control over what other people do, what they think about us, and how they behave. So realizing that helps you manage your anger and your expectations. So even yourself, you may not be able to meet your own expectations of yourself because you are human. So we can get angry with ourselves when we hold ourselves to such rigid rules and standards, so that when we fail to meet those rules, we get angry with ourselves, not realizing that as humans, because we are humans, we are intrinsically fallible. And because we're intrinsically fallible, mistakes are bound to happen. So back to that scenario where she did this, I had to remind myself, well, she's a human being. She makes mistakes. I may have probably disappointed someone as well. So these are so I'm going briefly into intervention, but I'm just trying to help you understand that in the problem lies the solution, the intervention. Some people use anger to control and belittle. A lot of people realize soon enough that when you show anger, people run for cover. Nobody wants to be around someone who's angry. People shy away from confronting people who are angry. So some people get angry because they've realized that it helps them have some power and control. Typically narcissistic people, people who have high fragile self-esteem, and their very sense of self depends on other people's evaluation of them. So people like that are angry. They're always angry about one thing or the other because they realize that when they're angry, it's more likely that people will do what they want them to do. So it's a way of controlling people's behaviors, that when I shout at you, run for cover. So this is why some people are angry chronically. So you can imagine that if that is you and you notice that anger is a coping strategy, don't bother coming for anger management because it's helping you and you probably don't want to get rid of it. So these are the things we check when we get to therapy, and you check the motives and the incentives behind the emotions. Sometimes people are holding on to these emotions because it serves them well. Another reason people get angry is that it's a way they've learned to cope. Have you ever had a conversation with someone and you're calmly telling the person what's going on that is wrong, that is not necessarily your fault, and the person starts shouting? And you're like, why in the world are you shouting at me? I did nothing wrong. I'm just transferring this piece of information. Typical in couples. I am trying to tell you that our daughter is pregnant, God forbid. And the father's like, what do you mean she's pregnant? I'm like, I'm not the one. I'm just... So it's a coping strategy that when things are out of control, I instill control by raising my voice and being angry. So our anger is a reflection of our expectations versus our reality. Expectations, people should respect me, people should be fair, people should be just, people should be reasonable. Reality, people do not respect everyone no matter how respectable you are. People do not do what you want them to do all the time. People will behave foolishly and unreasonably a lot of times. So anger comes when we sometimes make unrealistic assumptions about people. And we think or we assume that people will behave the way we want them to. So I mentioned about the functions of anger. So the reason why intervention and anger management is not about getting rid of anger is that it does serve a function like every other emotion. So God did not make a mistake when he created us humans and inherent in us is these emotions. So what we get enraged about, what really annoys us is a pointer to what is very important. So for me, in that example I gave you, you can speak to me disrespectfully. I will just look at you and be like, what's with her or him? But don't cross my children. Don't cross that boundary. So now you understand why I was so angry with that example. If it had been me, she did that too. I'll probably be like, now wow, you understand. But she did this to these kids and maternal instinct rose up and I was like, no, you don't do that to my kids. So that is an indication of what matters to you. So what enrages you is a pointer to what you value. So in anger management, we're looking to see what anger teaches you about yourself. For instance, if getting shouted at enrages you, then it means you value respect. If being manipulated or taken advantage of or taken for granted annoys you, then it means you value honesty and justice. And the example I gave, if your children is, important to you, then anything concerning them, you will be enraged. So I'm just pointing out one of the benefits of being angry. Other functions of anger increases determination and resilience. I like to give this example. Have you ever seen a freedom fighter or an activist that is not angry? They always seem to be angry. They're raging and they're, fighting for something, a cause. So anger breeds determination, resilience. It motivates to go on. I once had a patient a doctor, a resident, and the program was not going the way she planned. She had planned to exit the program by a certain period and strike and whatnot. Downing of tools by doctors elongated the thing and she was angry. And with the anger came headaches, poor sleep, which made things worse. There was no structure in the residency program. Very annoying when there's no structure. So part of what we did in therapy was to teach her to harness this energy that she had and put it into reading and studying to exit the program. So we channel the anger, this energy. Remember I said earlier, anger is energy to do the things according to your value. We use the energy to study. And when she did that, oh my goodness, did she study? Did she show up for the round? Did she do all she needed to do? Why? She was sick and tired and wanted out. So these are some of the things we can do to handle anger when we know some of the benefits of it. So anger empowers, it protects our self-esteem. It covers vulnerability, fear, hurt. So from the psychotherapeutic perspective, if a patient comes with anger, you have to find out whether this anger, is it a primary emotion or is this a secondary emotion? Because if it's a secondary emotion that the anger is as a result of another emotion, then you had better deal with the underlying emotion. And if you deal with the anger and expose the underlying emotion, you would leave the patient vulnerable. So the anger is there for a reason, to stand up for the other emotions and to stand up for the person's right. So we need to look into that if you're ever in that situation where you are helping someone to manage their anger. So I wanted to play a video that is a typical example in what is happening in our country today between Senators Natasha and Akpabio that would typically illustrate anger in action. So we can play that now.
You have denied me the right to contribute to governance. I have not been able to take the second reading of my numerous debates. So, Mr. Senate President, I am not afraid of whatever is silent. I will not be shocked to the contrary. I choose, as the Senator duly elected by my people, I choose to remain on this seat. How one day, the worst you will do, Mr. Senate President, is to suspend me from sitting. And I promise you, the fact that I am suspended does not mean that I will cease to contribute my quota to the development of my people, the women of Nigeria, and Nigerians at large. Mr. Senate President, I have taken a whole lot from you. Now I don't want to speak publicly, but in due course I will tell Nigerians so how you have discriminated against you, how you have maligned me, how you have dehumanized me. Your choice of words is everything that is in the Senate. I'm starting off with you to fresh to the womankind, and I have tolerated a whole lot. So, Mr. Senate President, I am not afraid of you. Do what you may, but I will not leave this seat.
Thank you. So, so that is what anger looks like. So I want us to, with that video in mind, think about what I'm going to say next. So when we are angry, something called negative framing occurs, which is where we primitively sort people into friends or foe, enemy. So when you're angry with someone, in your mind, the person is your enemy. And you see people, other senators trying to calm her down, and she refused to be calmed down. And you see the pointing of the finger, you see the fists. There was energy, you could sense the energy. If we had a pulse oximeter, we would see heart rate increase, would see breathing increased. This is what anger does. So there's a primitive sorting. The person is categorized immediately as an enemy that must be, either taken out or sorted out or blocking our progress and needs to be removed. The next thing is that there is a dehumanization and overgeneralization. What that means is we forget that this person is a human being. It's like the person is an obstacle in our way that needs to be taken away. And this is, an example of this is, if you remember Nazi Germany, when the Jews were killed, they were not human in the eyes of the Germans. They were pigs and animals, subhuman, that needed to be wiped out so that the Nazi race would be pure-blooded and they would get rid of the Jews. Then there is a rebellion that anger brings up, which you saw in that clip. She didn't want to be persuaded or pacified by anyone. There is a repugnance, that means disgust. When we are really angry people, we see them as less than us, and as less than human, and as bad and obstacles in our way. Decreased inhibitions means we are no longer acting in a calm, calculated, poised manner. We lose all decorum and we say all the things in our minds to say. Even if the person is bigger than us, we don't mind looking up and down and saying, don't you dare do things like that. So inhibitions are reduced when we're angry. And finally, there's something called righteous indignation. What that means is we take on the part of a righteous judge, and the person automatically becomes an enemy. We are right and they are wrong. So this is what happens when we are angry. I've mentioned this earlier, the health consequences of chronic anger. The reason I mentioned this, apart from to create awareness, is so that you have an incentive to control your anger. Not for the other person, but for yourself. Because chronic, ongoing anger would harm the person who is angry. So someone once said, and I find this quite interesting, that unforgiveness is like swallowing poison and hoping that your enemy will die. So when we hold on to anger for all the reasons I've said, is not fair, is unjust, is blocking my progress, it's not right, this person is this and that, we actually end up harming ourselves. Increased risk of hypertension, increased risk of heart disease, increased risk of stroke, tension type headaches. I have patients that are being treated for tension type headaches that they've had for years. Why? Because they're angry at the system at work. A lot of people are angry at the system in Nigeria, and you see it shown in the way people drive, in the way people do all sorts of things, and their justification is the system is corrupt, I'm angry with the system, and so I'll do whatever I like. Finally, we have arrived at the crux of the matter. So what do we do about this emotion that we've been talking about all this while? So 3 major strategies. Number 1, reduce your vulnerability to it. So like every other emotion, we have a bank, a psychological bank of positive and negative emotions. So if day to day, in our day-to-day lives, we keep increasing our bank of positive emotions, then when situations that arise that tend to stress us out happen, we will not be as stressed out or as angry, since we're talking about anger, as we otherwise could have been if we didn't have this bank of positive emotion. So I love this strategy because it means you are trying to prevent anger before the anger even happens. So I will talk about that. The second thing is to identify the triggers, your personal triggers. So for me, in the example I gave you, when this happened with my neighbor, I noticed that, all of a sudden I became very energetic. My breathing increased, and behaviorally, if I was to see her then, when I'm angry, my speech becomes very slow, I become very eloquent, and I can say things that I might regret. So for me, these are my own telltale signs of brooding anger. So I need to watch out for these things so that when I notice that I'm kind of slowing down and I'm talking to you like you're stupid and you cannot hear me, and I'm saying, excuse me, you know that you should not, then you know that I'm really angry. So identifying your own personal physiological changes, the changes that happen in your body when you're angry, is one way so that you can nip them in the bud before they get to the part where your cortex, your prefrontal cortex, will not be able to inhibit these things anymore. The last and one of my favorites is stop and think. So stop and think is an acronym, which we will explain going forward. So reducing vulnerability to anger, another acronym, ABC, please. So the A means accumulate positive emotions. So it means, what is it in your day-to-day life that you can schedule that would give rise to positive emotions like pleasure, fun, adventure, sense of mastery. So the way we schedule appointments and we say, oh, today I have so and so patients, I'm supposed to do this. That is the same way we can schedule activities that we know would give rise to positive emotions. It could just be like every Friday we have movie night. Or it could be like every Wednesdays I call up the girls and we chill and we have a virtual call or we meet someplace. But anything you know that gives rise to positive emotions, so that you are increasing your bank of positive emotions and you are preventing yourself from being stressed out and angered by things that would typically anger you. So schedule it. You can have a daily schedule, you can have a quarterly schedule, you can have a yearly schedule. So what I'm explaining to you, this is how I teach patients to handle anger in anger management therapy sessions. The B is to build mastery. So if you have a goal that you want to achieve in line with whatever matters to you, and you begin to steadily work towards that goal, it gives you a sense of accomplishment, a sense of achievement. And whether it's a short-term goal, mid-term or long-term goal, doing these things make you feel like you are doing something that matters to you. And this is you building up positive emotions so that you are not easily swayed when the things go wrong, as they will typically go wrong, because this is life, right? The next skill is to cope ahead. So cope ahead means if you are aware that the situation you are going into is going to stress you out and going to annoy you. Some people will tell me, oh, doctor, my in-laws, oh my goodness, they're coming for the holidays. I don't know how I'm going to cope. They always get on my nerves. So what we typically do is cope ahead. And I asked them, what typically happens? What's the worst that would happen? Oh, mother-in-law would talk to me as if I'm her little child. She disrespects me. She wants my husband to obey her. She doesn't want, and stuff like that. So then we begin to build up strategies that could help her cope with things like that. What could you say in response? What could you remind yourself of when this happens? How could you handle this? How could you respond to her when she says things like that? So we do all this, we plan the worst, then we plan strategies that would help her respond to these situations, and we practice. So we do role play, where I become the mother-in-law and she is her, and I do my very best to aggravate her, and she responds using the skills that we've learned. So what happens is that you've coped ahead, so that when the situation does present itself, you walk in calm as a cucumber, responding the way you've learned, and you're not flustered or angry. Then the other ones have to do with your body, physically, what you can do. Because as you probably know, what affects you emotionally will affect you physically, and what affects you physically will also affect you emotionally. Anger, like every emotion, has its bodily responses. So your body is involved here. And if your body is already compromised because maybe you have not treated cough and catarrh very well, maybe you have some malaria, you have high blood pressure, or maybe even mental illness, you are more likely to be vulnerable to these emotions than someone who doesn't. So taking care of your physical body is one way to reduce vulnerability to any emotion, not just anger. Eating a balanced diet, avoiding substances. So substances are like our allies. We think they are allies. When I'm anxious, when I'm angry, oh, I need a smoke. I'll be calm. I know just what to do. I need a joint. I need to smoke. I need to, do something. I need to drink to calm me down. But what you don't know is that those substances inherent in them actually can increase inhibition, like alcohol. It can increase anxiety, like weed. So in the interim, it helps you. Then in the long term, it sabotages you. So not a good idea. Sleep. So I mentioned earlier that anger can prevent sleep. So learning sleep hygiene, like sleeping around the same time every day, doing relaxing rituals in the night before your bedtime, being sure there are no bright lights, and having, good sleep hygiene practices already in place can fortify you so that if you've had a good night's sleep, you're less likely to be irritated and irritable when something irritating and irritable happens. Finally, exercise. So exercise is something else, another factor that helps us to keep our bodies strong and strengthen our immune system so that we're able to cope when things that tend to give rise to anger arise. I learned this skill at the webinar I told you about, the Plateaus Academy, and I found it quite interesting. So one of the speakers was talking about inoculating yourself. So this is different from what I just mentioned about reducing vulnerability. He works in a prison and takes care of hardened criminals who are always angry. So he shared that one of the things he did to help his prisoners manage their anger was to expose themselves to these triggers at will. I found that really interesting. I said, really? So instead of jumping into the deep end and not knowing how to handle it, he was saying that you can build a hierarchy of things that annoy you and begin to willingly expose yourself to these things that annoy you. That it's almost like you develop a thick skin. The more you hear these things, the less it bothers you, and you just keep climbing your hierarchy. I don't want to try this in session, but it's something I thought to mention in case you want to try it and see how it goes. So bottom line is expose yourself to things that would annoy you gradually, and it would help you develop a thick skin. I haven't tried it, so that's a disclosure so that you don't come to me and say I exposed myself to a trigger and entered into a fight. So yeah. So there are signs of anger. So one of the things when the psychologist was talking about exposing yourself and inoculating yourself was that you need to take note of the specific signs of anger that you have. And I mentioned this earlier when I talked about my pace of speech slowing down when I get angry, heart rate increasing, heart breathing pattern changing. So these are all the common signs that you could take note of and identify yours, so that when you get angry, you can identify that, okay, my anger is increasing now. I'm noticing clenching of my jaws, clenching of my fists. And if you gauge your anger to be maybe, if from a scale of 0 to 10, 10 over 10 being you are enraged and you are livid, then you can say, when it's 5 over 10, I would do this and this. If it doesn't work, I'll do this and this. So this is another way you can handle your anger. So I mentioned stop and think. So this is actually what I typically would do in therapy, stop and think. So stop stands for, the S stands for literally to stop. So assuming you're having a conversation with a spouse or a colleague and you notice that it's beginning to get heated up. So stop means literally take a break. Can we continue this conversation some other time? I need to take a break. So literally stop. Take a breath is the T. Observe and be mindful. P means to pull back, get a holistic perspective. And the other P means to practice what works, what achieves your goals, what action or behavior is in line with your values. Like I was saying earlier about what I did, where I said, I don't want to show up or be seen as some crazy woman. I wanted to be seen as someone who was respectful but did not want to be disrespected. So what do I mean by stop? Take a time out, detach, remove yourself from the environment. So there are times, so the typical question is, what if I can't remove myself from the environment? What if the person I'm talking to is my boss? And it will be disrespectful to walk away. So what I say is detach yourself in your mind. In residency, we know that as consultants would berate you, they would abuse you, abuse your generations yet unborn, and we would detach ourselves in our mind to enter one ear and come out the other ear. So this is what you would do if you can't physically leave the environment. If you can, maybe that would be better. So leave the vicinity. If the relationship is important to you, that's when to say, is it okay if we continue this conversation some other time? Maybe you give a specific time. Otherwise, you might compound issues by, Dr. Anireto said we should leave, bye, and then how dare you walk out on me, that will compound your issues. So next step, next slide. So the T is take a moment. So when you've exited the situation or in your mind you've detached yourself, take a moment means use skills, soothe your anger, do something to calm yourself down. So I love TIP. I've mentioned it in other presentations where we talked about how to handle difficult, painful emotions. So the TIP stands for, the T is temperature. So I love this. I use this all the time. Cold water on your face for a few minutes, and it typically would reduce that heart rate. It would reduce the breathing and to make you automatically feel calm without you having to think and do anything special. So you can do something behaviorally. There are other skills as we will go on. You would see other cognitive skills, responding, but a lot of times people are not in the presence of mind. Like I explained earlier, when you are angry, the amygdala is hyperactive, the prefrontal cortex is quiet, so you don't have that presence of mind to do anything cognitive, but you can use temperature. So the T is cold water, temperature, a bowl of cold water, put your face into it for 5 seconds, hold your breath. The I is intense exercise. So my son likes to play basketball. So when you see him bouncing that ball, somebody has annoyed him. He's bouncing the ball and he's shooting the hoops. The boy is angry. So by the time he's done, he's calm, and then we can have a conversation. So what's going on with you? So other people will go for a sprint. They'll just start running. I had a patient who was on admission. Having talked about TIP, he got agitated and he went for a walk. I'm like, that's better than confronting the nurses and punching someone. So activity. If you are somewhere where you can't move out, okay, he said I should round up. I hear you. We're rounding up. And you can't go anywhere, then you can stay in place and really begin to, jog in place, but do something. The first P is paced breathing. So I do this all the time. 4, 7, 8. Take a deep breath while counting to 4 in your mind. Hold it while counting to 7. Exhale while counting to 8. It is research and evidence proven to induce relaxation response and get you to be calm. The last P is progressive muscle relaxation, where you are contracting and tensing and relaxing muscles gradually from your hand upwards or from your head downwards. To self-soothe means to use your 5 senses in the service of helping yourself calm down. So use your eyes, for instance. You can watch a movie, to something that would, a comedy that will make you to be less angry. You could look at the sunset, look at nature. Your ears, you could listen to a podcast, scripture, music, call someone, sensation. You could take a soothing bath. Get cold ice cubes, work wonders if you run them along your arms. Safe place imagery, if safety is a concern and you really feel like you're feeling threatened, then safe place imagery is fantastic because you use your imagination and you imagine a place where you're safe. And while you're imagining it, you're using your 5 senses in the imagination. So you're seeing things in your mind eye vividly. You're imagining what you would hear in this imaginary place. You're imagining the temperatures you would feel in this imaginary place. And you're imagining how you would feel emotionally in this imaginary place. Another thing that could help is pros and cons. So check the advantages and disadvantages of doing what your anger is urging you to do, vis-a-vis your values and what matters to you. So this is from Dialectical Behavioral Therapy, DBT. We could also, the O means observe. So when you have detached yourself, and then you've used any of these techniques I mentioned to reduce take the edge off your emotions and your anger, the next thing is to be mindful of your thoughts. Just the way I did in that example, I asked myself, okay, what am I thinking? And that's when I realized that the thoughts I was having at that time was, this is so disrespectful, this is so unfair. Why would you do this? These children did nothing to you. If you had an issue, all those thoughts went through my mind. So notice the thoughts, name them, and normalize. Normalize works if you have the tendency to blame yourself. So to normalize means to realize that you're human and it's okay to have these thoughts. So how do we identify the thoughts? Ask yourself, what am I thinking? What's going on in my mind? Step 4, the first P, is to pull back. Now, hopefully, by the time you get to this step, you would have calmed down enough to be able to think and have a different perspective. So to pull back means now that you've identified what you're thinking. So for me, this is so disrespectful. Why would you do that? What is the evidence that she meant to be disrespectful? We've not had any issues before. We've been getting along fine. So I concluded that it wasn't something that was done intentionally. So is there an alternative way to look at this? She may have had other things going on in her life. And she's actually, did I mention she's a single mother? And she has been taking my kids unfailingly. So this is what I told myself, and my anger began to reduce. Actually, she has been trying, and this is the first time. So to get a holistic perspective means to question your own thoughts. And the answer you have typically would help to reduce the intensity of your anger. So again, another thing to do is, this is still under the pullback. See whether you are setting any unrealistic standard. So I was, in that example, I was assuming that she should always be disrespectful. But I don't know if she had any emergency. I don't know whether there was something that made her behave that way. So it's unrealistic to expect people to behave in certain ways all the time. You certainly don't behave respectfully all the time. So seeing it this way and realizing that I also get on people's nerves, and people will say, why would you do that? Because I'm also human, helped me to pull back, get a different perspective, and even begin to empathize. Who knows what was going on that morning that she rushed off and forgot my kids? Who knows what was on her mind? 5, so the last slide is, achieve your goal in that particular situation. So the reality is that she will not always act, talking about the example I gave, people will not always do what you want them to do. I have zero control over what she does. And loving kindness meditation is a specific kind of tool used when the anger is beyond surface, not this kind that I explained. I had a patient who was manipulated, betrayed, infidelity in her marriage. At the end of the day, the marriage collapsed. So there's a lot of enmity, there's a lot of hostility against her husband. These techniques will not work for that. That needs something called loving kindness meditation and something called reach. Because of time, we cannot go into discussing that, but just so you know, in case these things don't work for you, maybe your anger is more deep-seated than this can handle. So communication is another thing that can be done. Like I told you, I mentioned earlier about assertiveness. So I could have been aggressive, I could have been passive, but I chose to be respectful and also to speak my truth in that situation. Then lastly, think. The T is think about it from the other person's perspective. Try to see if you can put yourself in their shoes. Now, this is not just putting yourself in their shoes and remaining yourself. It is putting yourself in their shoes, bearing in mind their age, their level of education, their particular situation. So in this situation, she's a single mom, she doesn't have anyone, she's hustling around by herself. So putting yourself in that person's shoes, bearing in mind all these factors, would help you to see things through their perspective and hopefully reduce the intensity of your anger. H means have empathy. What might he or she be thinking? How would they be feeling if you left kids that are meant to be in school and you drove off and left them? Maybe she's also like, oh my goodness, oh, I forgot, and then she maybe forgot from there. So to have empathy means to think, ask yourself, what is going on in the mind of this other person? What could they be feeling? Maybe frustration, maybe anger, maybe things that are going on in her own life. I stands for interpretations. Can you think of another interpretation for the other person's action or behavior? So in this example I gave you, she had a lot on her mind and she drove straight to the school and forgot all about my kids. So the N means notice ways that the other person has been trying to help or show they care. So in this example, she had actually, despite everything that was happening, this was the first time that happened. So, and can you also notice how they may be struggling with their own stress? And the K stands for kindness. So be gentle in your approach. If you need to avoid, do that gently. And this is because it's who you are, not because of them. So in conclusion, anger is an emotion that arises when we feel threatened, treated unfairly, or frustrated. So it energizes us, gives rise to the urge to be aggressive with potentially negative consequences, including physical, our health, and psychological. So to manage it, we must stop and think, amongst other strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chika and Anireto, for yet again a wonderful presentation. The chief, Dr. Anireto, he didn't finish your story. He didn't tell us how it ended. Did you let us speak to the lady? Did she explain what happened later?
Okay. Thank you. So let me finish my story. So I called and she didn't pick. I sent a voice note and she responded. And this is a good way to teach anger management because, you know, the perspective I said, look at it in the other perspective. She wasn't sorry. There was no apology. All she said was, oh, I thought that we were no longer carpooling. So of course I was still angry. I'm like, but we discussed to start the carpooling. Why did you think that we would not discuss to end it? She said, oh, well, I just didn't remember. So at that point, I had two options. So I could, talk condescendingly towards her, give her a piece of my mind, why would you do that? This is whatever. Or I would act in line with my values. And so I said to her, we had a discussion to start this. So it only makes sense that we have a discussion to end it. Be that as it may, thank you for taking the kids all this while. But I know, I get it. I don't know what may be going on with you, but thank you all the same. And that was how we ended it. So because I had to hurry, some other techniques I used for myself was the reach, which I said, maybe I didn't say, is something you can use if the other party is not even sorry. And I use this a lot in couples where one party is acting a certain way and is unapologetic and the other party just wants to move on and let it go, but is finding it difficult because of the intense emotions. So in reach, you recall the hurts and what the person has done, and then you respond to it. So in this case, it could be, yes, she wasn't apologetic, but maybe that's her way of dealing with whatever she's dealing with. Some people feel it's beneath them, or they feel like to apologize makes them less of who they are. That's hers. That's on her, not on me. So it shows more about the kind of person she is, and that's not the kind of person I want to be. So the E is to express how you feel, which I did in the assertive. The A is to be altruistic, meaning to realize that you're doing this because of the kind of person you are, not whoever the person is. Because our tendency is to feel like this person does not deserve forgiveness. This person does not deserve for me to let go of this anger. This person deserves for me to hold this anger to the bitter end. But then remember what I said, that if you hold on to anger, it breeds hostility, and hostility will harm you. So I chose to just let it go and to see, even though she didn't say anything, she didn't give any explanations, I knew her situation because, been to her house a couple of times, our kids are in the same class, we've attended birthday parties and things like that. So I know that in all her rushing and going up and down, she doesn't, either her husband is not in this country or something. So I said, well, who knows what she's dealing with, and this is probably the least of her issues for her to have acted like that. Bear in mind that this is not an ongoing thing. So it was easier for me to let it go, remembering all the other times where she had showed up for the kids and taken them to school. So the C stands for commitment. So it means committed to forgiving. So I typically pair the reach with the loving kindness meditation, which is where you imagine someone you love and who loves you, sending you warmth, wishes, prayers, love, joy, and all those things, and you're receiving all those things, and then you replace this person who cares about you with the person who has annoyed you and who you're learning to forgive, and then all the goodness you've received, you now reflect it back to this person. So typically when we do this, the person is either lying on the couch or sitting back and their eyes are closed. So it typically evokes a lot of emotions, a lot of tears. But the thing is, you need to realize that forgiveness is helping you, not them. So that's why it's a commitment to forgive. So you would look at that person in your imagination. If you have a picture, you look at it and you'd say, I forgive you, I let it go. And I did this for a patient of mine, I mentioned earlier, who had a tumultuous relationship, a lot of gaslighting, that is, where you say things to make the person feel like they're out of their mind, like their recall of certain situation is not factual or is different, so that they're feeling as if they're losing their mind because of the way you give feedback when they say things. So she had to commit to doing that. And the good news is, after 2-3 sessions, she could talk to her ex-husband and not feel that intense hostility and anger that would arise. So it's something we have to stay with. So the H is hold on to it. It means do it over and over again. So forgiveness and letting go is not a one-off thing, especially when it's deep-seated and there are actual real reasons why you should hold on to anger. So it's something you have to keep doing over and over again. But remember to recall and respond to the thoughts that give rise to the anger every time. So in this particular patient's example, her husband grew up in a family where his parents maltreated him, and he was also involved in a relationship before they got married where the lady in question, who was white, or who was a white lady, typically led him on and was having affairs with different people, and he was the last to know. So he felt like a fool and had sworn to himself that he would never let any woman, treat him like that again. So this is the mindset he had before he married this patient of mine. So it was him actually reacting this way to protect himself. So bringing all these things into play helped her to see that he was also a victim, and he didn't know how else to protect himself other than to treat her the way he did. So it made it easier for her to let go. Of course, it still wasn't an excuse. It still wasn't an excuse for the things he put her through, because at the time she saw me, she was depressed and anxious and having panic attacks, all because of that relationship. So, yeah.